The crystal halls of Nethera Prime stretched for miles in every direction. Towers of living glass rose toward a purple sky, and bridges of solid light connected buildings that had stood unchanged for 100,000 years. This was the seat of the Interstellar Council, the center of galactic civilization, and the most powerful place in the known universe. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the entrance of the Grand Assembly Chamber and tried to control her breathing. She was 52 years old, with gray streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes from decades of diplomatic work. Behind her stood her small team of advisors, all of them wearing the dark blue uniforms of the United Earth Coalition. They looked tiny against the massive doorway, like children approaching a cathedral. The doors opened without sound, and Elena walked forward into the light. The chamber was circular and vast. Floating platforms held representatives from 12 ancient species, each one more strange and magnificent than the last. The Nethari appeared as beings of pure golden light, their forms shifting and flowing like living flames. The Vorathi were crystalline giants, their bodies made of living gemstone that had grown for millions of years. The Thesan were clouds of connected particles, each individual made up of billions of smaller beings thinking as one. And in the center, on the highest platform of all, sat High Arbiter Thisenvol. He was Nethari, and he had guided the council for the last 40,000 years. His light burned brighter than any other, and when he spoke, his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "The representative of Earth may approach," he said. Elena walked to the small platform prepared for her species. It was the lowest in the chamber, barely above the floor. She had to look up at everyone else, and she knew this was intentional. The council wanted her to feel small. She cleared her throat and began to speak. "Honored members of the Interstellar Council," Elena said, "I come before you as the voice of humanity. My species achieved faster-than-light travel 23 years ago. Since then, we have established contact with 47 civilizations and built peaceful relationships with many of them. We have studied your laws, your customs, and your history. And today, we formally request membership in the Interstellar Council." She paused and looked around the chamber. The ancient beings watched her with expressions she could not read. "We ask only for the rights granted to all member species," Elena continued. "The right to trade freely, the right to settle uninhabited worlds, the right to protection under council law. In exchange, we offer our friendship, our curiosity, and our determination to contribute to galactic civilization." For a long moment, there was silence. Then High Arbiter Thisenvol leaned forward, and his light seemed to pulse with something that might have been amusement. "How long do humans live?" he asked. Elena blinked at the unexpected question. "On average, approximately 80 to 100 years with current medical technology." A ripple of something passed through the chamber. Elena did not understand it at first, but then she saw the Vorathi representatives turning to each other, their crystal bodies chiming with what sounded almost like laughter. 80 years, Thisenvol repeated. "I see. And tell me, Ambassador, how old is your species? How long have humans existed?" "Modern humans have existed for approximately 300,000 years, Elena said, feeling uncertain now. 300,000 years. The High Arbiter's voice carried no emotion, but somehow Elena felt the contempt in it. "The Nethari have existed for 2 million years. I myself have lived for 600,000. The Vorathi are functionally immortal, their consciousness growing and evolving for as long as the universe provides matter for their bodies. The youngest species on this council has existed for 4 million years. He paused, and his light seemed to dim slightly. "You are mortals," he said, and the words sounded like a curse. "You are born, you live briefly, and you die before you can accumulate any meaningful wisdom or experience. You are mayflies. Your entire civilization, Everything your species has ever done has occurred in the time it takes a Netheri child to learn to speak. Elena felt heat rising in her face, but she kept her voice steady. With respect, High Arbiter, our short lives do not diminish our achievements. We have built great civilizations, created art and music, explored our solar system, and now reached the stars. We believe we have much to offer. What could you possibly offer? A Vorathi representative asked, his voice like grinding stones. By the time you learn anything useful, you are dead. By the time you master any skill, your body fails. You are temporary. You are insignificant. We are not insignificant, Elena said, her voice rising despite her efforts. We are determined. We are creative. We adapt and change faster than any species you have ever encountered. You change because you cannot endure, Thiessen Volume replied. That is not strength. That is weakness. Your petition is denied, Ambassador. Earth may continue to exist as a pre-sentient observation zone. You will be monitored, but not contacted. In perhaps another 1,000,000 years, if your species still exists and has developed true longevity, you may petition again. The dismissal was absolute. Elena opened her mouth to argue, but the platforms were already rotating away from her. The ancient beings had lost interest. She was being dismissed like a child interrupting a meeting of adults. As she was escorted out by silent robotic attendants, Elena passed an observation window. She stopped and looked out at the vast spaceport beyond the crystal towers. Hundreds of ships moved through the purple sky, and among them she saw a Vorathi cargo fleet heading toward the outer reaches of the system. The ships were beautiful. They were elegant and graceful, and clearly the product of incredible technology. And they looked exactly like the Vorathi ships in the historical records from 50,000 years ago. Elena stared for a long moment, and then she began to smile. The Immortals had not changed their ship designs in 50,000 years. They had not innovated. They had not improved. Why would they? They had forever. There was no urgency, no pressure, no need to rush. But humans did not have forever. Humans had 80 years, and they felt every single one of them slipping away. As Elena walked toward her ship, her mind was already racing with plans. The Council had refused to welcome humanity as equals. Very well. Humanity would become something the Council could not ignore. The Immortals had forgotten what it meant to be hungry, to be desperate, to be alive in the truest sense of the word. They were about to be reminded. Callisto Station was the largest human settlement outside Earth. It orbited Jupiter's fourth moon, a massive structure of metal and glass that housed 3 million people. Families lived there, worked there, raised children there. It was proof that humanity could survive and thrive beyond their home world. The Vraxian hegemony saw it as an easy target. The Vraxians were not members of the Interstellar Council. They were conquerors, a brutal species that had absorbed dozens of civilizations into their empire. They specialized in hunting what they called short-lived races, species too young and too weak to defend themselves. The Council occasionally condemned their actions, but never intervened. Mortal species were not worth protecting. When the Vraxian fleet appeared near Jupiter, it consisted of 900 warships. Each vessel was 500 years old, tested in countless battles, crewed by warriors who had trained for decades. The fleet commander, Admiral Zarks, had personally overseen the conquest of 11 civilizations. He expected this to be easy. Captain Yuki Tanaka stood on the bridge of the U-East Defiance and watched the Vraxian fleet approaching on her tactical display. She was 61 years old, and she had been preparing for this moment her entire career. Her father had been one of the original researchers who improved Council shield technology. Her mother had been on Ambassador Vasquez's team at Nethera Prime. All ships, this is Fleet Admiral Tanaka, she said into the communication system. The enemy outnumbers us 70 to 1. They have more experience, more firepower, and they believe we are weak prey." She paused and smiled. "They are wrong. Today, we show the galaxy what mortals can do. All ships, engage at will." The human fleet numbered only 87 vessels, but each one carried technology that had evolved through 15 years of desperate innovation. Shields that could phase in and out of normal space. Weapons that bypassed traditional defenses. Engines that could accelerate and turn in ways that larger ships could not match. And pilots who flew like they had nothing to lose. The first wave of human fighters launched from the carrier ships and dove straight into the heart of the Vraxian formation. Admiral Zarks watched his tactical display with confusion. The small craft were flying directly at his largest battleships, making no attempt to evade or maneuver defensively. "They are insane," his tactical officer said. "No," Zarks replied slowly. "They are desperate. Mortals always are." But as he watched, the human fighters began to dance. There was no other word for it. They spun and rolled through the space between his ships, dodging weapons fire by centimeters, moving in patterns that should have been impossible. His gunners could not track them. His missiles could not lock on. And then the fighters began firing their own weapons, and Vraxian ships started to explode. Lieutenant Commander James Wright was 26 years old. He flew a single-seat fighter, called a Sparrow, and he had been flying since he was 16. He had logged more combat simulation hours than most Vraxian pilots had logged in real combat. He had trained every day, knowing that he would only have a few decades to master his craft. He was very, very good. His Sparrow twisted through the defense grid of a Vraxian cruiser, his hands moving on the controls with instincts faster than thought. He fired his main cannon 3 times, each shot finding a weak point in the enemy's armor. The cruiser's reactor went critical, and James was already gone, banking hard toward his next target. On the bridge of a Vraxian battleship, a sensor officer stared at his readings in disbelief. "Admiral, the human ships are using shield harmonics we have never seen before. Our weapons are passing through their defenses without causing damage." "Impossible," Zark said. "Those shields are based on Council technology. Council technology has not changed in 50,000 years. Apparently, the humans have changed it." The battle lasted 6 hours. Every minute of it was recorded by observers from the Council neutral species who had come to watch the mortals be slaughtered. Instead, they watched something else entirely. They watched human pilots ram their damaged fighters into Vraxian weapons platforms, ejecting at the last moment and drifting in space, laughing on open communication channels as they waited for rescue. They watched human captains order their ships into maneuvers that had a 30% survival rate, accepting those odds because the alternative was letting their people die. They watched a species that had been called mayflies fight with the fury of beings who understood that every moment might be their last. When it was over, the Vraxian fleet had lost 847 ships. They retreated in complete disorder, their admiral among the dead. Humanity had lost 12 vessels. Captain Tanaka stood on her bridge and looked at the wreckage floating in space around Jupiter. She was breathing hard, her uniform soaked with sweat, her hands shaking from hours of sustained tension. She was old for a combat commander, and she knew she would not live to see the full consequences of what had happened today. But she had lit a torch, and others would carry it forward. On Nathara Prime, High Arbiter Thyssen watched the recordings in his private chambers. His light flickered in patterns that indicated deep disturbance. He watched the human pilots, flying their impossible patterns, taking their insane risks, dying and killing with equal abandon. He had lived for 600,000 years. He had seen countless species rise and fall. He had always believed that mortality was weakness, that short lives produced short thoughts and small achievements. For the first time in 300,000 years, the Senville felt something cold in his ancient heart. It was fear. These creatures had taken council technology and improved it in less than 2 decades. They had defeated a superior force through sheer aggression and innovation. They fought as if death meant nothing to them. No, he realized. They fought as if death meant everything. They fought because they knew they were dying from the moment they were born, and they refused to let that stop them. The mayflies had shown their teeth, and the galaxy would never be the same. The broadcast of Elena's humiliation reached Earth within hours. Every news channel, every social media platform, every screen on the planet showed the same images. The golden being of light looking down with contempt. The crystal giants laughing. The word mortals spoken like an insult. For 3 days, humanity seemed to sink into despair. People walked through streets with their heads down. Children asked their parents why the aliens hated them. Politicians gave speeches about dignity and patience, but their words sounded hollow. The universe had looked at humanity and found it worthless. Dr. Marcus Chun sat in his small office at the Shanghai Quantum Institute and watched the broadcast for the 5th time. He was 47 years old, a physicist who had spent his entire career studying faster than light travel. His hair was already turning gray from too many late nights and too much stress. He had perhaps 30 or 40 years left, if he was lucky. As he watched the Varathi representatives laugh at Ambassador Vasquez, something changed inside him. It was not sadness. It was not fear. It was anger, pure and hot and clarifying. He rewound the broadcast to the part where the council shared technical data as part of the diplomatic exchange. It was meant to be a gesture of condescension, like giving a child a picture book while the adults discussed serious matters. The data showed council technology, their shields and weapons and engines, all of it thousands of years more advanced than anything humanity possessed. Marcus studied the shield specifications for a long time. Then he frowned. He called his colleague, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, and asked her to look at the data. She arrived at his office an hour later, her coffee growing cold as she stared at the screen. "This is wrong," she said. "What do you mean?" "I mean the efficiency ratings. Look at the power consumption versus output. It is wasteful. There is a better way to configure this." Marcus nodded slowly. "That is what I thought. But I could not believe it. Why would they build it this way?" Marcus leaned back in his chair and thought about what the High Arbiter had said. The Nathari lived for millions of years. The Varathi were immortal. They had forever to improve their technology. But that was exactly the problem. "They built this 50,000 years ago," Marcus said, "and they never changed it. Why would they? It works. They have no deadline, no pressure, no reason to hurry. They will get around to improving it eventually. Maybe in another 100,000 years." Yuki looked at him, and he could see she understood. "But we do not have 100,000 years," she said. "No," Marcus agreed. "We have maybe 30 years of working life left. Less if we are unlucky. Everything we want to accomplish, we have to do now." They began working that night. Within a week, they had a team of 20 researchers. Within a month, they had improved the council shield design by 80%. Within 6 months, they had tripled its efficiency and reduced its power requirements by half. The news spread through the scientific community like fire. All across Earth, researchers began studying the council technology with new eyes. They stopped seeing it as impossibly advanced and started seeing it as a starting point. In São Paulo, a 17-year-old girl named Maria Santos was doing her homework when she saw a news report about the council's faster-than-light engines. She had always been good at mathematics, the kind of good that her teachers called frightening. She looked at the equations, saw a shortcut that no one else had noticed, and sent an email to the physics department at her. Local university. Her algorithm reduced FTL travel time by 40% in Mumbai. An engineer named Priya Sharma received the news that she had terminal cancer. The doctors gave her 18 months to live. She could have spent that time with her family, making peace with her end. Instead, she went to her workshop and began designing. She had always had an idea for a new kind of weapons platform, one that used principles of quantum entanglement to bypass traditional shields. Everyone had told her it was impossible, that the physics did not work that way. But Priya had nothing left to lose, and she worked 20 hours a day, driving herself beyond all reasonable limits. She died 14 months later, surrounded by blueprints and calculations. Her daughter, who was also an engineer, finished her work. The weapon was tested 6 months after that. It worked perfectly. Across the planet, humanity began to build. Not for war, not at first. They built because they finally understood their greatest weakness was also their greatest strength. The immortals had forgotten what it meant to be hungry. They had forgotten the terrible urgency of a life that could end at any moment. They planned in centuries and executed in millennia, because why rush? There was always tomorrow, but humans did not have tomorrow. Humans had today, this hour, this moment. Every second was precious, because every second was numbered. And that made them work harder, think faster, and dream bigger than any immortal ever could. The council had called them mayflies. They had meant it as an insult. But mayflies accomplished their entire life's purpose in a single day. They mated, they bred, they fulfilled their destiny while longer-lived creatures were still waking up. Humanity would do the same. 5 years after the rejection at Nethara Prime, Earth launched its first warship built entirely with human-improved technology. It was faster than any council vessel. Its shields were stronger. Its weapons were more accurate. They called it the UES Defiance. 10 years after that, there were 100 ships in the fleet. 15 years after that, there were 1,000. Each generation of engineers improved upon the work of those who came before, racing against their own mortality to leave something behind. The council did not notice. They were busy with matters that would unfold over the next 10,000 years. What could mortals possibly accomplish in a mere decade or two? They were about to find out. The recordings of the Battle of Callisto Station spread across the galaxy like a wave. Every species with access to interstellar communication saw the footage. They saw the impossible victory, the dancing fighters, the human captains who smiled as they ordered their ships into certain danger. But most importantly, the recordings reached the forgotten ones. The Keth were an insectoid species who lived on 17 worlds near the galactic rim. Each individual Keth lived for only 40 years, and they reproduced quickly. The council classified them as vermin, barely worthy of observation. But the Keth built cities in a single generation. They invented new technologies faster than any immortal species could track. And they had been watching humanity with growing interest for years. When the Keth ambassador arrived on Earth, she brought with her plans for agricultural systems that could feed a planet with half the resources. Her name was Chittering Voice of Morning, and she lived for only 4 more years after the treaty was signed. But her children continued her work, and their children after them. The Aluum came next. They were aquatic beings from a world covered entirely in warm oceans, and they lived for approximately 120 years. Their culture was built around the beauty of impermanence. They wrote poems about sunsets and dying flowers, and the way light changed across the water. The council found them sentimental and foolish. The Aluum found humanity fascinating. You understand, the Aluum philosopher Deepwater Dreaming said to Elena Vasquez, who was now Secretary General of the United Earth Coalition. You know that all things end, and you do not let that truth destroy you. You let it drive you. Elena, now 70 years old and walking with a cane, nodded slowly. "We have always known that death is coming," she said. "The only question is what we do with the time we have." The Tazari were warriors. They lived for 60 years, and their entire society was organized around the concept of honorable death. Every Tazari child was taught that dying in service of something greater was the highest possible achievement. The council considered them primitive and violent, but the Tazari understood something the immortals had forgotten. Life had meaning precisely because it ended. A sacrifice mattered because it cost something real. An immortal could never truly give their life for a cause, because they would always exist in some form. But a mortal could give everything, and that made their gifts priceless. The Tazari fleet arrived at Earth with weapons ready, not to attack, but to join. Their war speaker, a massive being covered in ceremonial scars, knelt before Elena Vasquez and offered his sword. "We have waited 1,000 generations for someone to lead us," he said. "We have found you." Within 5 years, the Mortal Alliance included 17 species. All of them had been dismissed by the Council as too short-lived to matter. All of them had been exploited, ignored, or conquered by longer-lived races. And all of them had been watching the mayflies of Earth. With growing hope, Elena stood before the first full assembly of the Alliance in the rebuilt chambers of Geneva. The room was filled with beings from a dozen different worlds. Insectoid Keth clicked their mandibles in approval. Alduum delegates floated in specially designed water tanks. Tazari warriors stood in formal ranks, their scars gleaming under the lights. "They called us mortals," Elena said, her voice carried by translators to every being in the room. "They said our lives were too short to matter. They said we could never accumulate wisdom, never build anything lasting, never contribute to galactic civilization." She paused and looked around at the faces watching her. Some were beautiful. Some were strange. All of them were burning with the same fire she felt in her own heart. "But we know something they do not," she continued. "We know that everything ends. The stars will burn out. The galaxies will fade. Even the immortals will someday die, though they have forgotten this truth. Nothing lasts forever." She lifted her cane and pointed it at the ceiling, at the sky beyond, at the vast, uncaring universe. "And that is exactly why we fight so hard to make our time mean something. That is why we build and create and love with such intensity. Because we know we only have one chance. Because we know that every moment is precious. Because we know that death is not our weakness." Her voice rose, strong despite her age. "Death is our fire. Death is our teacher. Death is the reason we accomplish more in a century than the immortals accomplish in 100,000 years. They have forgotten how to be hungry. They have forgotten how to be desperate. They have forgotten what it means to be alive." She slammed her cane against the floor. "We will remind them." On Nathara Prime, High Arbiter Thysenval convened an emergency session of the Council. The mood in the chamber was unlike anything he had experienced in 400 millennia. The immortal species were confused and frightened, though they tried to hide it. How did this happen? A Vorathi representative demanded. How did these mortals build an interstellar coalition in 20 years? An elderly Nathari sage, nearly at the end of his 10,000-year life, spoke from the shadows of the chamber. His light had dimmed with age, and his voice was soft. "We have forgotten urgency," he said. "We measure progress in millennia. They measure it in heartbeats." And while we debated their petition for 17 years, they reinvented warfare, rebuilt their civilization, and created an alliance that now threatens everything we have built. "Threatens?" Thysenval said. "They are still mortals. They are still brief. They cannot possibly threaten the Council." The elderly sage turned his fading light toward the High Arbiter. "Can they not? Look at the recordings again, Thysenval. Look at how they fight. Look at how they live. They are not afraid of death because they have accepted it since birth. What can we possibly threaten them with that they do not already face every day? The chamber fell silent. We have ruled this galaxy for 400,000 years, the sage continued. But we have ruled it in stillness, in stagnation, in the comfortable knowledge that we had forever to solve any problem. These mortals do not have forever. They have now, and they are using every second of it. He didn't further, his long life finally coming to its end. I will not see what comes next, he said. But I think the age of immortals is ending, and the age of mortals is beginning. His light went out, and in the silence that followed, the council finally began to understand what they were facing. 50 years had passed since Elena Vasquez first stood before the council on Methera Prime. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Human traders moved through every major trade route, their ships faster and more efficient than council vessels. They undercut ancient monopolies that had existed for millennia, offering better prices and faster delivery. Immortal merchants who had controlled certain markets for 100,000 years found themselves suddenly irrelevant. Keth engineers built megastructures in years that council species would have taken centuries to complete. They worked in shifts that never stopped, each generation passing knowledge to the next with perfect efficiency. A Keth engineer who started a project might never see it finished, but her daughter would, and her granddaughter would improve upon it. Tazari mercenaries became the most sought-after warriors in the galaxy. They fought with a ferocity that immortal soldiers could not match because they truly did not fear death. Every battle might be their last, and that made them fight as if every battle mattered. Because it did. Aluum diplomats negotiated treaties between species that had been at war for longer than humanity had existed. They understood that grudges and conflicts were temporary, that all things ended, and that peace was always possible if both sides could accept their own mortality. The Mortal Alliance did not declare war on the Council. They did not need to. They simply lived and worked and built and dreamed and achieved and died and passed everything they had learned to those who came after. And the Council began to crumble. It started with the younger immortal species, those who had only lived for a few million years. They saw the energy of the mortal races, the constant innovation, the refusal to accept that anything was impossible. Some of them began to wonder if their own long lives had become a prison rather than a gift. The Netherian colony on Outer Reach was the first to formally request Alliance membership. They were tired, they said. Tired of endless debates that went nowhere. Tired of watching the same problems go unsolved for 10,000 years because there was never any urgency. They wanted to learn what it meant to be alive again. Other species followed. Not all of them, and not quickly. But the tide was turning. High Arbiter Thiessen Volume watched his civilization fracture and felt something he had not experienced in 500,000 years. He felt old. Not in body, because his form of light could last forever, but in spirit, in purpose. He had guided the Council for 40,000 years, and suddenly he did not know what he was guiding it toward. He sent a message to Earth, requesting a private audience with Secretary General Elena Vasquez. She was 93 years old when she received his request. Her hair was white, her hands trembled constantly, and she needed assistance to walk more than a few steps. Her doctors told her she had perhaps 5 years left if she was careful, perhaps less if she was not. She agreed to the meeting. They met on a neutral station between Earth and Nethera Prime. Thiessen Volume entered the chamber first, his light filling the room with golden warmth. He had dressed in his full ceremonial radiance, the form he used for the most important occasions. Elena entered on the arm of a young aide. She moved slowly, carefully, each step a small victory against the limitations of her aging body. When she reached her chair, she sat down with a sigh of relief and looked up at the ancient being before her. They stared at each other for a long moment. How? Volume finally asked. How did you do this? You will be dead within the decade. You will not see what you have built. You will not enjoy the fruits of your labor. Everything you have worked for, you are handing to strangers who have not yet been born. Elena smiled. It was the same smile she had worn 60 years ago when she first saw the unchanging Vorethi ships. That is the point, she said. I was never building this for me. I was building it for everyone who comes after. Every generation lights a torch and passes it on. You immortals have been holding the same torch for so long that you forgot it was supposed to spread. Volume dimmed slightly. We have lived so long, he said. We have seen so much. We thought we had achieved wisdom. You achieved stagnation, Elena said, not unkindly. Wisdom is not about accumulating knowledge. It is about knowing what to do with that knowledge. And you stopped doing anything with yours 100,000 years ago. We were content. You were dead. You just had not stopped moving yet. The high arbiter flickered, and for a moment his light seemed almost fragile. What happens now? Do you destroy us? Conquer us? Take revenge for how we treated you? Elena shook her head slowly. We do not want revenge. We never did. We just wanted to be treated as equals, as partners, as beings worthy of respect. She leaned forward in her chair, her old eyes bright with intensity. The galaxy belongs to those who use their time, she said, not those who hoard it. You can join us. Learn from us. Remember what it means to be urgent, to be hungry, to be alive. Or you can fade away into irrelevance, watching from the sidelines as the mortals build the future. She held out her hand. It was thin and fragile and covered with age spots. It trembled slightly in the air between them. The choice is yours, she said. But you should know that the age of immortals is over. We are not asking for a seat at your table anymore. We built our own table, and there is room for anyone who wants to join us. Volume stared at her hand for a long time. He thought about the centuries he had wasted on meaningless debates. He thought about the technologies that had gone unchanged because there was no reason to improve them. He thought about the Nathari sage who had died warning the council about exactly this moment. And he thought about Elena Vasquez, who would be dead in a few years, and who had accomplished more in her brief life than most immortals accomplished in 1,000,000 years. Slowly, the ancient being of light reached out and took her hand. His light met her flesh, and for a moment they were connected across the vast gulf between their species. Mortal and immortal. Brief and eternal. Dying and undying. Elena smiled again and squeezed his hand with what little strength she had left. Welcome to the Mortal Alliance, she said. Now let us go make the galaxy a better place. We do not have forever, after all. Thiesenvol, for the first time in 600,000 years, laughed. It was not the dismissive laughter of the council chamber so long ago. It was real laughter, born of genuine surprise and something that might have been hope. He had forgotten what hope felt like, but the mortals had reminded him. The age of the immortals was over. The age of the mortals had begun, and across the galaxy, countless beings of all lifespans looked up at the stars and saw not an uncaring void, but a canvas waiting to be filled with meaning. The mayflies had risen, and they had changed everything.